Trump didn't just upset Japan. He sent a chilling message to every U.S. ally watching China's rise. When Beijing growls, Washington might ask its friends to sit down and stay quiet. In this commentary, we're not just talking about one awkward phone call. We're talking about the credibility of America's alliances in the face of an increasingly aggressive China and a newly assertive Japan. A phone call that shook more than diplomacy. According to the narrative you've just heard, President Donald Trump called Japan's new prime minister after she declared that Japan would help defend Taiwan if China invaded. Instead of backing Tokyo, Trump allegedly told her to tone down her rhetoric and stop offending China. Put that in context. Over the past decade, China has rapidly expanded its military presence in the East and South China Seas, including around the disputed Senkaku/Diaoyu Islands near Japan, flown military aircraft and sailed warships in ways that simulate blockades or invasion scenarios around Taiwan, raising constant fears of conflict. At the same time, Japan has been shifting away from its post-World War II self-restraint posture. Under successive governments, Tokyo has reinterpreted its pacifist constitution to allow collective self-defense, meaning Japan can act to help allies under attack, including in a Taiwan contingency. Approved record-high defense budgets, and a new national security strategy that explicitly names China as the greatest strategic challenge to Japan's security. So when the Japanese Prime Minister says, if China invades Taiwan, Japan must act, that's not a random outburst. It's the logical endpoint of a years-long strategic shift in Tokyo and a direct response to China's behavior. For Washington to respond by pressing Japan to step back is not just bizarre. It's strategically self-sabotaging. When an ally is treated like a bargaining chip, this is where the critique of Trump's worldview cuts deepest. Rather than seeing alliances as a community of democracies with shared values and long-term commitments, Trump and some of his ideological allies talk about a multipolar world dominated by a few big powers, the US, China, Russia, and everyone else as background noise. We've heard this explicitly from figures like Senator Marco Rubio, who described a return to a world of multiple great powers, where the US, China, and Russia are the central players and others are secondary. In that mindset, countries like Japan, Canada, or even NATO as a whole can start to look less like partners and more like pieces to be traded in a bigger game with Moscow or Beijing. That's exactly what this Japan incident symbolizes. Japan takes a risk by openly signaling it will stand with Taiwan, a move that strengthens deterrence in East Asia. China lashes out, testing not just Japan but the United States. Instead of reinforcing its ally, Trump, according to this account, leans on Japan to retreat, effectively rewarding Beijing's pressure tactics. For allies from Tokyo to Warsaw to Seoul, that's a terrifying precedent. China's pressure campaign, not just words, but weapons of leverage. The story doesn't stop at rhetoric. China has systematically developed economic and technological levers to punish countries that resist its agenda or align too strongly with the US. It has restricted imports and tourism to countries like South Korea and Australia when they took positions Beijing disliked. It has repeatedly signaled that rare earth export controls, vital for high-tech and defense industries, could be used as a strategic weapon. Meanwhile, in the US-China trade war, tariffs and retaliatory measures hit American farmers hard. At one point, China sharply cut back purchases of US soybeans and shifted to suppliers like Brazil, forcing Washington to roll out multi-billion-dollar bailout packages for American agriculture. In other words, Beijing has learned how to hit the US where it hurts politically, in the Farm Belt, in key industries, in public opinion. From that angle, the Japan phone call looks less like an isolated blunder and more like a symptom of a deeper vulnerability. A US leadership that can be pressured into undercutting its own allies to relieve short-term economic or political pain. Japan's awakening and Washington's hesitation. There's another layer the mainstream commentary often misses. Japan is no longer the passive junior partner it once was. In Southeast Asia, surveys by reputable think tanks have found that Japan is among the most trusted major powers, often ranking ahead of both the US and China in regional public opinion. Regional leaders openly say they welcome a larger Japanese role in security and economic affairs because they see Tokyo as relatively stable, rules-based, and predictable. So when the United States of all countries undermines Japan's attempt to play that stabilizing role, it's not just Tokyo that feels betrayed. It's the entire region receiving a dangerous message. Japan may be trusted, but Japan's hands are tied because Washington still calls the shots and can shut them down under pressure from Beijing. That doesn't just weaken Japan. It hollows out the credibility of the entire democratic front in Asia. On the streets of Japan, sovereignty and humiliation. All of this plays out not only in diplomatic cables and trade flows, but also in the everyday optics that shape Japanese public opinion. We've seen viral videos of U.S. military police walking armed through Japanese streets, particularly in places like Okinawa, where the American presence has been controversial for decades. Incidents where American personnel detain civilians, even other Americans, while asserting broad jurisdiction, have sparked renewed debates in Japan about real sovereignty and unequal treaties. Now combine that with the idea that U.S. troops patrol your neighborhoods, your prime minister faces public threats from Chinese officials, and your supposed closest ally calls to tell you to calm down for China's sake. That's not just geopolitics. That's humiliation, broadcast in real time to a population that has spent years debating how to move beyond the shadows of World War II and become a normal power again. The real question, can allies still trust America? At its core, this isn't just a story about Trump or even just about Japan. It's a test of a much bigger question. In a world where China is willing to coerce, punish, and intimidate, can America still be trusted to back its allies when the pressure really hits? Or will it treat them as bargaining chips in a deal with Beijing or Moscow? Because if Tokyo can be told to sit down, if Kyiv can be told to fend for itself, if NATO can be casually dismissed as obsolete, then every ally is forced to ask an uncomfortable question. When the next crisis comes, are we standing with a partner or with a power that might trade us away? What do you think? Has the US already crossed a line where its alliances are more theater than commitment? Or can Washington still rebuild the trust it has burned with partners like Japan? Let me know in the comments.